coolest thing? Some of that crazy shit happened right here.
What's going on, everybody? This is dkdynamite, and today what I have for you guys is a bit of a big video going over all of the evidence and proof that we have so far, both in-game and via leaks, for a Call of the Dead remake being DLC 4 for Black Ops 4 Zombies. So before I jump into the juicy information, big shout out to a good buddy of mine, Eric Maynard, who not only has been working with me on Marvel Hub videos lately, but also sat down with me to talk about just about everything that we could possibly find about Black Ops 4, leading us into the direction that is Siberia for DLC 4 in Black Ops 4. So thanks to him, I have a pretty big list of topics to go over as to why Call of the Dead is absolutely DLC 4. So we're going to start off with all the evidence we have in-game. This does not include leaks. This is all in-game. It can all be found from Black Ops 4 maps. We first up have a Max's telephone on classified mentioning Siberia for almost no reason, just kind of going over stuff that isn't necessarily about Group 935, but him just not approving of what Richtofen did there. So once again, setting up the foundation for something that obviously would want to be explained and explored before the Ether storyline is over. So why set that up at all in classified if we aren't going back to Siberia in a DLC 4 or a potential DLC 5 remake? So that's some evidence right there.
They are fools, ignorant, petulant fools. They blindly follow him. Sheep herded by a false shepherd. A wolf wearing human flesh. They must know not to trust him. It's instinctive. In the darkest recesses of their minds, a voice screams out, warning them. But they don't know why. They don't know what he did. They were all prisoners of war, left to rot. Nobody cared if they lived or died. So we took them. Group 935. We just didn't know how far he takes the experiments. The amount of element 115 he pumped through them. I'm surprised any of them survived Siberia. And now they follow him, taking orders from the very man who broke them, fried their brains. The MPD, the Aether, it corrupted him, as it did my Samantha.
We then have both Nikolai's in Classified and Blood of the Dead having quotes about Siberia and the experiments that were done in Siberia. So another hint towards some massive side plot going on with Call of the Dead.
I am here to remind us all, Takio. Like lighthouse before tempestuous sea, I will steer us away from rocks.
We then have that big drawing on Classified, which many people brought up after playing Alpha Omega, and this drawing shows the Vril device, or the Golden Rod, with the elemental shard inside of it, alongside the Tower of Babel. And this is obviously the elemental shard inside the Golden Rod, and not the focusing stone from Shangri-La, since the focusing stone is black, while the elemental shard obviously has a different texture and design here within this drawing. So this kind of answers the question as to why we picked up the elemental shard from the APD in Alpha Omega. We're going to be placing it inside of the Golden Rod and going along with Nikolai's grand scheme, as opposed to putting the focusing stone in the Golden Rod back in Moon and going along with the Richtofen's grand scheme. So a lot of parallels between how the storyline nearly ended in Black Ops 1 and 2 and how it's now going to end within Black Ops 4. It's also worth mentioning that every new story map for the Ether in Black Ops 4 has been a map that was not in Zombies Chronicles 1 and had a one-off crew, which only leaves Call of the Dead that hasn't been remade yet. So obviously Mob of the Dead, 5, those had different crews from Ultimus and Primus and Victus, and those maps have been remade here for Black Ops 4. We also had the original Nuketown Zombies where the CDC and the CIA were playable. Once again, not Ultimus, Primus, or Victus. Victus. So there's only one map left that had a different crew on it, and that is Call of the Dead. We're not going to count Shadows of Evil because that's a different story, but with Call of the Dead being left, the only map left with a celebrity crew that hasn't been remade, it makes the most sense to fit that in with DLC 4, and I'll explain why that makes sense story-wise later, and then to leave DLC 5 open to be a Victus Chronicles, a mini map pack with 3 Victus maps, Transit, Die Rise, and Buried, only focused on Victus, where we had Zombies Chronicles 1 only focused on Ultimus with that one premise map in there, which is Origins. We then have the Dying Dempsey cipher over on Classified, where he mentions it being very cold as he's dying. So what is the only cold location that makes sense to cover within the Ether storyline? It's obviously Siberia, the Call the Dead outpost. So with that being said, it makes sense that no matter what the Easter egg involves on DLC 4, at some point Dempsey will die, and he obviously will mention how cold it is. So the only place that logically makes sense to go that's cold is Siberia or Call the Dead. It makes sense to kind of get that remake out the way so that it just leaves the door open for pure Victus maps going forward if they do remake those maps in a DLC 5. So obviously Dempsey saying that it's cold hints right towards Call the Dead. Where else could they be going that's cold? Where else could they go where it makes sense that it's not Siberia? It just doesn't make sense to go anywhere else but Siberia. And obviously the map could be similar to Blood of the Dead, Classified, and Alpha Omega, where it's still that core map you love. You can still see the original layout, but it's so expanded upon that it's a completely different map, plays differently with different weapons, different quotes, different Easter eggs, a different boss. It is essentially a new experience that takes the foundation of something that was on last gen platforms. So I think it'll work out perfectly fine once they remake Call of the Dead. They take a little bit of the layout from Blackout and how that map works, and obviously give it that cold, snowy environment like we all know and love from the original, and they can honestly make it all work. But we then have a quote from Nikolai in Blood of the Dead where he says, "Now you know how the trees at Tunguska fell."
Now they know how trees felt at Tunguska. Electricity dangerous. You hell pigs should be more careful. Okay, I admit. Richtofen has given me one thing I like.
And that's a quote that he says when he has his Ragnaroks out. So that quote again is something that is sort of hinting towards a side plot that hasn't been fleshed out very much within Black Ops 4 yet. So I think Call of the Dead being in a snowy, cold environment could easily allow us to dive into the lore about Tunguska. And obviously with Alpha Omega, we got a lot of threads closed when it comes to Peter McCain, Broken Arrow, Group 935, a lot of threads that were closed in that map. The map has a lot of closure in it. It's absolutely not a filler map for the Ether storyline. It really does close off a lot of loose ends that we were itching to know about ever since we got some more hints about Broken Arrow, Peter McCain in Revelations, in some of Blood of the Dead, Classified. Alpha Omega really wraps a lot up, but there are still a couple of things left to be desired for, and I think Tunguska is definitely one of them. So Call of the Dead is a perfect opportunity to go in depth with why we're getting these Tunguska quotes in Blood of the Dead and even Classified. We then have the obvious one. We have the giant lighthouse in Blackout. So we already have assets for a Zombies Chronicles 2. We had assets for Nuketown already in Blackout. We had the bunker. They took that, made it Alpha Omega. We have assets of the Victus maps already. You have the Transit Diner in Blackout. We have the Transit Bus with Ted fully rendered and modeled out in Black Ops 4 within the new multiplayer map Remnant. You obviously have the entirety of Buried located in Ghost Town. You have the Buried Maze, and then all that's really left is to make Die Rise. You already have most of your Victus maps, and you have Call of the Dead already done in Blackout. Easy assets to port over into Black Ops 4 Zombies. It would be a banger move and opportunity if, for the final operation of Black Ops 4, they make the construction site Die Rise. Boom, all your assets are done right there. You have a new location to go to in Blackout, a completed version of construction site, and you can port that over for a Zombies Chronicles 2. So instead of making Zombies Chronicles 2 3 Victus maps and 1 Call of the Dead, it makes so much more sense to just get Call of the Dead out of the way with DLC 4 just so that DLC 5 is pure Victus maps. I think if they didn't make Alpha Omega a Nuketown remake, then it would have made more sense to say, okay, DLC 5 is going to be 3 Victus maps, 1 Call of the Dead, and 1 Nuketown remake. So that would have made more sense. But now that we have 1 remake left before it's pure Victus maps left to be desired, it just makes so much more sense to do Call of the Dead now. Now, with the beginning of Operation Apocalypse Z, we also have some very questionable cameos and characters and involvement with Treyarch. We have M. Shadows from Avenged Sevenfold, who is now a playable character in Blackout if you get him from reserves. But the question is, why is Avenged Sevenfold getting involved with Treyarch again? Well, the easy answer is this. We had the song Not Ready to Die in Call of the Dead. They could easily be doing a remix or a remake of that song for the Call of the Dead remake. It would be perfect fan service and perfect for nostalgia if they did that. And I'm sure Avenged Sevenfold's been in the studio lately working on that song or that remix for the Call of Dead remake, which is not going to be releasing for another couple of weeks now. So it makes so much sense as to why they're in the studio to begin with. M. Shadows isn't just there to become a playable character in Blackout or anything. It makes so much sense that they're going to collab with Treyarch one last time for the finale of the Ether storyline. And as a bonus, we also have Danny Trejo in Blackout, which I've covered here on the channel. He was just randomly thrown into the Apocalypse Z trailer and was immediately available for purchase as a playable character in Blackout. So again, Danny Trejo being on the original Call of the Dead just means that in a remake, they would want him involved in some way, shape, or form too. That's if they can't get a hold of Sarah Michelle Gellar, Michael Rooker, and Robert Englund. They're probably a little bit too expensive. Maybe Danny Trejo was just nice and decided to come into the studio for a cheap price, maybe even for free, and did a favor for Treyarch. Said, you know what, I'll make a character model for you. You know, I'll be in Blackout, and I'll also have a cameo in the Call of the Dead remake. Maybe he did that. Maybe he's that tight with Treyarch that he's okay to do an open cameo like that for either a cheap cost or for free. We just don't know the details of that as of right now. But Danny Trejo, along with M. Shadows, being involved with Treyarch really screams Call of the Dead. It just does not make sense for them just to be a part of a small operation that is Apocalypse Z and not be involved with what I believe is going to be a massive remake and reimagining of Call of the Dead. So once again, Danny Trejo may not be a playable character in this remake, but he may have a cameo appearance in some way, shape, or form. May just have radios with his voice talking about something. We just don't know. But obviously we got some closure to the Call of the Dead cast within Revelations, but maybe in a different universe, in a different timeline, the events played out differently. So we also have the budget I wanted to talk about. So obviously it was many people's concern that DLC 3 Alpha Omega had a animated intro and outro cutscene in the form of a cartoon similar to the Victus maps back in Black Ops 2 and similar to the animation of the comics. That really bothered some people, and the only thing I'm bothered about right now, which I'll talk about later as well, is the fact that Monty hasn't spoken.
The ether, the infinite, the reality beyond.
Agartha, the ether, the infinite, everything.
All I ask is that you do the right thing. The right thing for everyone.
Are they not able to afford Monty's voice actor? Is that really what's happening? Because if that's the case, it's going to be really weird to see him die or to be merged with the Shadow Man in DLC 4 and not have him speak a single word since the first Zombies Chronicles came out back in 2017 of Black Ops 3. That would be a big pain in the ass. But obviously the other theory is saying that, you know what, they saved as much budget as possible when they made Alpha Omega so that they could save the budget for many things in the finale to the Ether storyline, a rendered cutscene in-game as we had in Blood of the Dead. You're going to have that. You're going to have new music from Avenged Sevenfold, a remix of Not Ready to Die, cameos from Danny Trejo, possibly a cameo from Dr. Monty or the Shadow Man's voice actor, with them returning to do the voice lines for those characters one last time. You might even have them paying for a license to be able to show George Romero himself, maybe have him as a boss again, or to have voice lines from him in a radio of some sort, maybe using reused audio Solo they had in Call of the Dead in Black Ops 1. Obviously, he passed away, God rest his soul, but maybe they could do something with sort of reusing his character, or they'll just have a callback to him in some way, shape, or form, but they have to pay for a license to do that, I'm assuming. So there's a lot that they could have saved the budget for when it comes to DLC 4 in Black Ops 4. And obviously people out there are expecting this Great War map, and I expected it too. Don't get me wrong, I expected this to be an Origins remake, but in the form of a Great War, where the only similarities to Origins is the fact that you have the mound and the pack-a-punch system working very similar to Origins. You could also have giant keepers, as we saw in the Alpha Omega intro, taking the place of the giant Origins robots from Origins. So that'll be the only callback to Origins in a way, but the aesthetic of the map would still be something very new, the big Great War. But looking at how Black Ops 4 stability is, looking at how big the game already is in its entirety, it just doesn't make sense for a Great War map to be on such a big scale in a game that's unfortunately very broken. So I feel like the Great War map and the scale that Treyarch probably wants to make a map like that in, it would probably have to be a launch map with a lot more budget than a DLC map. That's probably the only way that could work. And obviously the Ether storyline is coming to a close as it's going to be rebooted for Call of Duty 2020, so there really isn't an opportunity to do the big Great War map on a scale that people are probably expecting, unfortunately. It's not about the system's capabilities or our platform storage or the resolution. It's not about that. It's really just about Black Ops 4 and the engine that it runs in, and not being able to handle something on such a big scale. If it wasn't for Blackout, maybe it could work, but I just don't see it happening for DLC 4. I really don't. And once again, even though people are expecting it, we need to kind of lower our expectations a little bit to realize that there are very little people working on this game right now due to a majority of the studio being put in charge of Call of Duty 2020. So I'm sure Treyarch would rather say, you know what, let's put together a banger Call of the Dead remake, which is so well written and plays so well to wrap up the Ether story, instead of delivering a half-ass mediocre Great War map, which people probably are expecting over Call of the Dead. But let's put out quality over quantity in a way. Let's put out some quality Call of the Dead remake content and not put out a Great War map just for the sake of putting one out because people are expecting it. Even though the Great War has been name dropped so many times across Black Ops 4, I still don't think it makes sense to do a map that isn't at the scale it should be. So with that being said, as even the Gaming Revolution has tweeted out, I think it makes sense to say we'll have a pretty well rendered cutscene to introduce us to DLC 4, where somehow we kill Monty and we leave the Shadow Man and the Summoning Key. We cover all that in the intro, and then Ultimate Richtofen is like, you know what, even though we just killed Monty, all the Apothicons, even though we just did all that, we have one last thing we need to do to really destroy all of Element 115. And then Ultimate Richtofen kind of has a trick up his sleeve that nobody else predicts, which is to not only destroy 115 and everything we know that causes Great War to begin with, but to reset the cycle in his favor, where he awakens the test subjects in a universe where there are no Apothicons, Keepers, Monty, Gods, Shadowmans, just him, just Nazi experiments, just good old classic zombies, which leads perfectly into the rumored Ether reboot in Black Ops 2020. Now this leads me into a very interesting tweet from Eric Maynard, the guy that collaborated with me on this video, and you guys are definitely going to want to see this, because even though these are guesses, there is so much support behind these tweets, so much storyline information that perfectly correlates with exactly what he's talking about. So first off, we have this tweet, one last guess. Call of the Dead, there to get the Vril device or the Golden Rod. We're going to be playing as the Primus Ultimus mix again. Victus are in the bunker, as Ultimus was in the original Call of the Dead, and they say, we activated the towers like he told us to, now let us out, or whatever. The Easter egg is getting them out and getting the Vril device or the Golden Rod, and the way through is their way back to the house. The finale starts with the changed Die Rise comic. Primus gets owned by Monty, then Ultimus Richtofen pulls the fast one he has planned with the towers and still gets the job done to kill Monty. And we then have another tweet showing the Vril device being from Call of the Dead, of course, the Elemental Shard is from Nuketown, while the Tower of Babel shown is from Transit, or more importantly, all three Victus maps, where you activate all three polarization towers to truly activate the Tower of Babel. That's how they get through, that's how they get to the house. He gets it now. So once again, building off of everything we've talked about here and kind of wrapping everything up together, as I mentioned before, DLC 5 or Victus Chronicles with all three Victus maps, that would kind of fill in the gap between DLC 3 and 4. It wouldn't release for a while now, obviously later into Modern Warfare's core life cycles when we probably see a Victus Chronicles, but what the maps would do is essentially reimagine Transit, Die, Rise, and Buried in the same way that Blood of the Dead and Classified and even Alpha Omega are reimaginings of Mob of the Dead 5 and Nuketown respectively. It would do that, kind of make the maps better, and obviously fit well with the modern engine of Black Ops 4, so we would obviously appreciate the maps more than we did back in Black Ops 2. And in terms of the story implications, it would have Victus reactivating the polarization towers, probably under a different Easter egg of course, but instead of activating them for Max's Richthofen like we did in Black Ops 2, we're essentially doing it for Nikolai. And Nikolai thought that doing that would just help them destroy Monty and all 115, when in reality, Ultimus Richthofen had another trick up his sleeve to where when those towers are activated, it also allows him to become overpowered himself somehow and then reset the cycle, killing everybody else on the team, which would be absolutely mad. But without a doubt, Tower of Babel will play a role in DLC 5 of Black Ops 4 Zombies, with Victus returning to Transit, Die, Rise, and Buried. There's also, I believe, a radio from Stuhlinger on Classified where he's also questioning why Richthofen and the gang sent them to a place they've already been to before, which perfectly correlates with Victus returning to the Green Run maps just for the sake of doing something they already did before, but this time with a different purpose behind it, activating those towers for the benefit of Primus and Ultimus to kill Monty and destroy all of Element 115.
Hello? Is this thing on? Richthofen! Hey, Richthofen! Been gone from my head a really long time. I gotta be honest, I'm freaking out a bit, man. It's so quiet. I can actually hear myself think. Do you know what that's like? It's not nice at all. So, listen, buddy, old pal, we gotta talk. You sent us here, of all places, but you forgot to tell us what to do!
Now, besides those tweets from Eric, we're kind of going to jump into some leaks now, because this goes back to an original tweet from the Woo Lads a couple of months ago, when the original plan, as they confirmed for Black Ops 4, was of course to have a Season 2 with a second season pass. We had a plan originally which would have involved the Black Ops Pass only having 4 new Chaos maps, with the Ether returning in Season 2, but they then changed that after the poor reception to the Chaos story and made it to where we had 2 Ether maps in place of the 2 original planned Chaos maps. So DLC 3 and 4 were then Ether, while Season 2 would then give us the remaining 2 Chaos maps and some new Ether maps along with Zombies Chronicles 2. But then that plan even changed after Treyarch was put in charge of Call of Duty 2020 or the Black Ops reboot, so they had to cut ties with the Chaos story, not continue it even though they had it planned, and then say, you know what, we're now forced to wrap up the Ether story in only 2 maps versus the originally planned 4. And I believe if the original plan stuck with the Season 2, instead of seeing a Zombies Chronicles 2, we would have just saw remakes back to back to back to back for the Ether storyline. It would have had DLC 3 be Alpha Omega, DLC 4 maybe would have been Transit, then we would have had Die, Rise, Buried, then Call of the Dead. And I think the Great War wasn't even in the cards to begin with for Black Ops 4 Zombies. I think we were always going to see straight remakes for the entirety of the Ether storyline in Black Ops 4, since that's the way they wanted to write the story for this game. While for the rest of the community, if you guys wanted new experiences, new maps, new locations, and new characters, that's where the Chaos story came in. They essentially took concepts that they were never able to flesh out with the Ether storyline, like a mansion map in London, a Titanic map, a Rome map, a Greece map in Delphi. They took those concepts that they had written down for Ether that they just couldn't write in and flesh out for the Ether, and created a short narrative known as the Chaos storyline, using those concepts to ensure that Black Ops 4 has a combination of remakes and new experiences for those out there who are sick of remakes. So it was almost trying to do the best of both worlds, giving the community nearly everything they could have wanted, but still, you can't please everybody. People are still complaining that we haven't had an entirely original map since Gorod Krovi, even though there really aren't many places left to go. People could disagree with that. People could say, oh, well, they could just write a new area they can go to make a new map, but I think with the way they want to wrap up the Ether storyline, it makes more sense to them and is more convenient for the writers at Treyarch to just give us these remakes to close off all loose ends and to kind of wrap up the storyline with Ultimus, Primus, and Victus altogether. So the Woolads had that original plan on their tweet, but since plans changed with Call of Duty 2020, we're now going to be seeing these 2 remakes in the form of DLC 3 and 4, Alpha Omega and Call of the Dead, instead of seeing Call of the Dead later on in a potential Zombies Chronicles 2. I think Zombies Chronicles 2 went from a potential big map pack like the original Zombies Chronicles was to a Victus Chronicles with just Transit, Die, Rise, and Buried, while Call of the Dead becomes the new version of DLC 4. Even though that wasn't the original plan, it's more convenient for them to just do a smaller map pack, Victus Chronicles, later down the line, probably next year. So with that tweet from the Woolads, was obviously outdated now, it's obviously confirmed from them and the reliable sources that Call of Dead was in the cards the entire time for Black Ops 4, but at the time when that tweet was posted, Treyarch didn't know that they would then be put in charge of Call of Duty 2020, which is why they didn't anticipate Call of the Dead being DLC 4 to begin with. Now, Eric also spoke to me about a pretty interesting theory about the snowy trees from the main menu of Black Ops 3 and 4, or the Frozen Forest, really coming into fruition with DLC 4. If DLC 4 is in Siberia, or the snowy version of Call of the Dead, it makes perfect sense to really go in depth as to why the Frozen Forest and Tunguska is so important with the Ether storyline. It would make so much sense to go in depth with that in the finale of the Ether storyline, which unironically is also in a cold environment. But last but definitely not least, we have somebody who will go unnamed that flew out to Treyarch to play Ancient Evil early that was able to report quite a few things. First off, we have a whiteboard in Treyarch HQ, which apparently they forgot to hide when the YouTubers flew out to play, and that whiteboard contained gauntlet challenges for Call of the Dead. So at the time of hearing about that, this was before we knew Call of the Dead would be DLC 4, I assumed that they were getting a head start on DLC 5 for Black Ops 4, a Zombies Chronicles 2, and I assumed at the time they were probably just getting together a list of challenges for a gauntlet that wouldn't be released for a long time. But now looking at that, it makes sense that they were planning gauntlet challenges for Call of the Dead, since it would be DLC 4, only 2 DLCs away from Ancient Evil. So that makes a lot more sense. And there was also word of the main menu. When they were playing Ancient Evil early, the main menu apparently had Nuketown and Call of the Dead as the next 2 maps on the map selection screen. So what does that mean? Nuketown's obviously DLC 3 with Alpha Omega, and Call of the Dead is obviously supposed to be DLC 4 for Black Ops 4 Zombies. Probably would have a different name, of course, but as a placeholder name, you had Nuketown and Call of the Dead chronologically releasing after Ancient Evil. So what does that tell you? Boom, DLC 3 and 4 are remakes. Plans obviously changed massively behind the scenes because of Activision putting Treyarch in charge of Call of Duty 2020 or the Black Ops reboot, and that is exactly why we're in the situation that we're in. But once again, you guys out there watching this could be like, you know what, I don't believe these leaks, I don't believe these sources, I don't believe anything you're saying, and that's perfectly fine. You guys can stay away from leaks, you guys cannot believe them. I'm just reporting to you guys some stuff from a very reliable person who just happens to be in talks with very reliable people himself, so I figured you guys would be interested in not getting your hopes up for a great war map in DLC 4, and instead you get your hopes up for something that's been teased ever since Blood of the Dead and Classified, which is getting the Golden Rod in a Call of the Dead remake. That's about it. Apologies for the long video, but there was a lot to break down, and I hope you guys found this video helpful with understanding why Call of the Dead's been teased for quite a while now for Black Ops 4, and why it is now DLC 4 for Black Ops 4 Zombies. But that's about it. This has been dkdynamite. Check all links down below in the description, and peace out, everyone.
We're completely surrounded! We're completely fucked!